So let me just introduce him real quick to you. He's a software engineer who has designed mobile websites, smartphone apps, website functions, and e-marketing systems. He's worked on projects with the Department of Homeland Security, Florida Department of Juvenile Justice, Florida Department of Corrections, Agency for Workforce Innovation, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and the Florida Music Educators Association, in addition to the city of Tallahassee. So, oh my gosh, all those people have technology because of John.
Yeah, well, I'm John. I graduated from University of Florida in computer and electrical engineering in 2003. My major actually ended up being a little bit of an afterthought. I started off as a music major doing jazz trumpet down at New World School of the Arts in Miami. And after a little while, I decided I just wasn't quite good enough to really make a career out of it, so I switched into computers because I always had a little bit of a passion for it. And by passion for it, I mean like probably a lot of people, I did a lot of computer gaming. So what happened is, my family had always kept pestering me saying, hey, John, can you come help us and fix our computer and things like that? And over the time that I'd been helping them, I gradually started picking up a lot of things. And then also what happened is, I, like a lot of kids, didn't have a lot of money to constantly upgrade my computer, and my parents didn't see the benefit of buying me $200 graphic cards the week they came out or letting me get a new console every time something came out. So I was constantly trying to figure out how to squeeze the most performance out of the little bit of resources I had. And because of that, I started kind of getting into a little bit more of the advanced features of the computers and a little bit more of the behind-the-scenes stuff. And it really ended up paying off quite a bit in the long run, because when I started off in a lot of the school programs, that kind of real-world experience was a pretty big help. Let's see here. Move on one slide. As far as the games I played, they're probably a little bit old for you guys, but I did start off a lot in online bulletin board systems and things off like dial-up connections and stuff like that. Also, I used to always make my roommates crazy in college because we would string a lot of LAN networks around through serial cables and old Ethernet connections and things like that so we could play games across the apartment and stuff like that. And, we played Quake and Doom and all those kind of things, and I always thought it'd be really cool to get into that, but unfortunately I wasn't terribly talented when it came to graphics or drawing, so, I had much more of a aptitude for math and logical things like that. So what I started working on then was some of my computer courses, and honestly, I think a lot of people find that some of the computer courses are pretty dry, but, in the beginning, some of the computer courses are really, they apply to such a broad range of fields. You'll have people from environmental engineering and computer engineering or computer science or mathematicians who are all taking these same courses. So a lot of my friends would start getting discouraged by that, because they have these visions of working on cool games, or doing awesome social media apps and things like that. And here they are working on discrete math, and they really just don't see how it's going to get them to where they want to go. And I think a lot of programs, my friends in business and journalism and other things felt kind of the same way. But to some extent, you just have to power through that, because if you can, you will start to get to those courses where you're just amazed by the things you're learning. I remember an example of my senior project was I'd started to get into motorcycles because I'd found that parking on campus was brutal. So for our senior project, we were all allowed to pick something and propose it to our project advisor. And I figured, okay, what I want to do is take my motorcycle and I want to come up with a digital display for it that's going to show me what gear I'm in, just trying to come up with some ideas of things I could do with computers, what kind of fuel economy I'm getting, also what voltage I have on the battery because my battery was running low. So what I did is I bought a little microprocessor for about $50 and programmed it in PicBasic, which is a basic language, and then wired it into the motorcycle's onboard computer. I just got a service manual, and there really wasn't much to it. There's just a couple wires. And basically, I demoed this thing for the class, and it was so cool because I'd taken, by now, what I'd started to pick up in school is just kind of generic programming concepts, that I still use to this day, and was able to apply it to something real world that people kept asking me why I didn't, go out there and try and sell it, which I would have, but by that time, a lot of bigger businesses had started making things that were a little bit more polished, and it would have been too tricky for me to try and compete with them. So, I started to really enjoy that kind of stuff, and kind of on the same lines, one of the projects or courses I took was something called Senior Architecture, and I really didn't want to take it, but I needed it to graduate, and I figured, okay, I'll give it my best shot, do pretty well, because I was on the home stretch, and, it started off and it was just brutal, because we were just drawing wires in a simulator, and, just kind of kept struggling through it, really not seeing what the purpose was, and then all of a sudden we ended up with an arithmetic logic unit, so basically it could perform fairly sophisticated math functions, and all of a sudden the next week we stacked the previous two components on top of each other, and we had like the bus of a computer. So all of a sudden now I was able to send multiple channels of communication simultaneously. So all of a sudden things that had seemed so abstract one week, all of a sudden the next week I was like, oh my goodness, here I am seeing and understanding a lot of what's actually going on when I look inside my PS3, or inside my desktop or laptop. So all of a sudden that stuff really became amazing, and it went from being a class that I really was not too passionate about to something that I look back at now as probably my favorite class there. And luckily I ended up being able to get some jobs that really suited me and I really enjoyed, but computers, like a lot of other fields, are just changing so rapidly right now, and they're such massive fields. You can go into hardware, software, networking, mobile apps, web development, graphical development, and it's just so massive that a lot of times people like myself think, they'll just graduate and they're going to get a job they like. And the best advice I got, that unfortunately I got a little bit too late, was to get some experience before you graduate. And a lot of people do internships, and they're doing it more as resume fodder, just to have something to beef up their resume so they can hopefully get that first decent job. But more than that, what I would say is, even if it's not a formal internship or something like that, maybe just see if you can go into a couple different office buildings, go see what the state workplace is like, or what a small company or a big company, and try and get a little bit of a feel just for, what your day would be like if you worked in those places. I had one friend who graduated as a lawyer, and all of a sudden they got their degree and they realized that the actual practice of law made them miserable. They liked the study of it and the concepts, but the actual application they just didn't find enjoyable. And I see a lot of computer people kind of end up in the same thing. They graduate without any really clear sense of direction, or a really clear idea of what their job is going to be like once they're actually in the workplace. You think that, okay, I'm going to be sitting here coding, working on this, but depending on what company you may work for or what specific area you're getting into, there may be more politics involved, and by politics I just mean kind of more inter-office politics, where an example is, I know my little biography thing talks about some of the state work I've done. State work is amazing in some ways, but also it can be a little bit frustrating at others because, they can't be quite as much on the cutting edge, because that would require them to just constantly be spending massive amounts on new equipment and software. So, those are all kind of things to just consider and try and prepare yourself for ahead of time. Me personally, I've found that working at small companies is probably my favorite, which is what I'm more or less doing. I work for a small company, and I do lots of consulting projects for the state and federal government or private companies. And I find that way I can work on some of these places that have big budgets, but I don't have to get too sucked into a lot of the hoops and red tape that sometimes they have to jump through, because a lot of times something as simple as coming up with a new website, they'll have committee meeting after committee meeting, and that doesn't personally appeal to me, where others, they really enjoy that kind of stuff. So I would say the more you can just get a feel for what you will actually be doing beforehand, the better off you'll be. I've actually got a little bit more before I get to that last slide, but my wife put that one in to mess with me, I think. One thing that I would like to say is, a question that I frequently get asked is, what's the most exciting part of being an engineer, a software engineer for me? And it's actually a little bit of a strange answer, because I remember about 2 years ago, I was working on a server that was responsible for sending out tax forms, all the forms that you get, your W-2s and stuff like that. And the email server that sent that out, because they couldn't afford to do paper mail anymore, had crashed. And the developer who worked on that had taken an extended leave of absence. He had some crazy stuff going on at home. So those of us who were left at the office had no clue what he had done, and his code didn't have a ton of comments in it, so we were just scrambling trying to get this thing back up, because we were very liable if we didn't get these emails out. And after just spending days and days and days on this thing, which felt like years in computer time, I eventually had said, okay, I've got to scrap this thing. The computer wouldn't even boot in the virtual environment. And it turned out that something as simple as the domain certificate we'd gotten from GoDaddy had just had a subtle change in it, and all of a sudden that alone was able to take down the entire computer network. So as frustrating as it was, and as crazy as it made me, the sense of victory, I guess, that I got once I identified the error and was able to fix it, despite the fact that the Microsoft tech and nobody else could, was incredibly rewarding. Because a lot of times when you come up against those challenges where you think, okay, there's got to be a way to do this, and you look on the web or you talk to your coworkers and none of them come up with an idea, and you come up with something innovative and new, and it's something that you really feel proud of, I think is pretty amazing. I love having a challenge that nobody else seems able to meet, and then finding a way to make it work. And then the only other thing I would say is, kind of along the same lines of how the different workplaces function and things like that. For me, these days I've moved up a little bit, and you can kind of, as your career advances, go in lots of different directions. You can go into more management and get away from day-to-day coding or engineering, or you can kind of stay there and become, extremely high level and proficient architect, basically the one who goes out and figures out from, somebody says, okay, I want an application that does this, and the architect will then figure out, what languages to use, what platform to build it on. So basically the one who develops the framework and then lets the other engineers fill in the gaps. So what I've kind of done is I've kind of gone a little bit in the middle. I like interacting with the other people, and things like that. I don't like spending every minute of the day writing code, but also, some other advice I got from a previous boss was that you don't want to get too far away from the code or the engineering side of things, because that's really what differentiates you from a lot of just the regular managers, because a lot of the managers are really great at what they do, but they don't have a terrific technical understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. So if you can get into a niche where you're able to have a little bit of both, you can become extremely valuable. Even the lesser skilled engineers I see are making more than I think any of the other professions that my friends have gone into, with the exception of medicine and law. But of course, you can get into engineering with an undergraduate degree. So, I'd say now I graduated in 2003 after lollygagging a little bit, and I make comfortably in the six figures now. So, I haven't been in the workplace for a terribly long time, so I would say, it can be a fairly rewarding profession, both intellectually and economically. And then, of course, the same thing, before I used to put tons of hours in because I was, it's just what I needed to do, so I'd put in 80 hours a week, more if I needed to. As part of sometimes being in a small company, that's how it goes. There's not as many people to pick up the slack. But now I've got it down to a lot more manageable 40 and do family time and boating and fishing, all those other things. So, despite the appearance a lot of engineers may have as boring, geek kind of people, there's actually quite a few who are pretty fun. A lot of my buddies are out golfing or fishing or learning to fly airplanes or doing lots of other things that I don't know if we would have had the opportunity to do otherwise. So, one other thing I just wanted to mention before I let you guys ask some questions is, how much time do you have on, or do I spend on continuing education? It was something my wife asked me about because in her field of public relations, it's a pretty big deal. I don't really spend much time on formal continuing education. I don't get too many certifications or go to too many workshops or anything like that anymore. What I've found is that the formal education, a lot of times, once you've been out for a little while, tends to have a hard time keeping up with the rapid change of pace. So what I mean by that is, I'm working on some new things right now in a language called Grails, which is Groovy on Rails. And, it's such a new language that there's really not, any certifications for things like that, or the same kind of thing. If you want to start working on development for Android 4.0 for a new mobile phone, or writing kernel code for the Ice Cream Sandwich Android operating system, that a lot of those things are so new that really curriculums just haven't been developed for them yet. And by the time they do and you actually get that certification, there's probably going to be something newer and better out. So I wouldn't say that it's not beneficial. I would just say that a lot of times you can train yourself just as well as you may be able to with, a more structured curriculum. So anyhow, I think that's pretty much all I've got for now, but I'd be glad to answer any questions you guys have.
Hey, John, thank you so much. I think we have a lot of computer geeks, I guess we could say. I think they'd be proud to say that in this room. Lots of students in computer programming right now. A couple of them had said, how can they get experience when they're in high school? Do you have any suggestions for them about how they could do that?
Yeah, actually, I was able to get a fair bit of experience when I was in high school. One of the things I did, I lived in Miami at the time, and my mom was taking some classes because she was going back to school for a PhD, and she suggested I go up there with her a couple times, and they were going through segments where they were working on, and she was in the pharmacy program and music at the same time, which is a crazy story, but they needed some help with their computer stuff, so I gave them a little bit of help, and it turned out the university there had quite a bit of need for extra help, and just being able to get in there and see some of those things was massively beneficial. The same thing, they also had a couple programs down there, which I don't know if they still have, but they had things called like the Laboratory Orientation Introduction and things like that. And I found that doing those was really neat. I went to like the Rosenstiel Marine Institute, and I got to see, how they were actually using some of this technology for their actual day-to-day work, and observing this marine life. And then another thing we did in Miami was, as part of that program, we went to Fairchild Tropical Gardens, and you could see how they were tracking all the germination and different changes to all the species in these computer models. And I think, it may take a little bit more legwork, but there's, if you go out to some of these companies that you think are, if fields that you might be interested in, if it's environmental engineering, I knew there was an environmental engineering firm I worked with briefly in Gainesville called Kugler and Associates, and they were doing mapping of particulate matter from concrete plants and things like Tropicana, the orange juice maker. It sounds kind of uninteresting, but it's actually pretty crazy because, when they build these concrete plants and stuff like that, they have to be extremely careful about pollutants. So they have to figure out all these things like traditional wind direction and predominant air currents, and then also have these really crazy models to do particulate mapping. And just getting in there and touching those things a little bit, I think, gives you a lot more experience. And also, as a pre-university experience, I would think, those things looked incredible on my resume. I would think they would on other people's as well. And, of course, you still have, I was also in math club and a couple other things, and a lot of times in math club and things like that, and science club, I got to work on, mathematical software programs like MATLAB and things like that, where you could do some pretty neat stuff. So I would think, if you could either do things within the school, or if you have any businesses nearby and you could just say, hey, I'd love to come in and, maybe volunteer my time one weekend or two, it's even possible that they might be willing to offer you some compensation. But I would think that even if you got no compensation for it, just the experience you gain would be invaluable.